Today I'd like to speak to you about the Jewish New Year and the story of the binding of Isaac, or the sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham. One of the very happy memories of my years of study in Israel was experiencing the High Holy Days in the holy city of Jerusalem. I remember when I first began to study Judaism and its feasts, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that the Jewish New Year, or Rosh Hashanah, like our Christian New Year, has several different themes attached to it. These themes convey the special characteristics of the festival. There are several reasons for the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. First, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, marks the beginning of creation, and Jews accept the Creator as their sovereign. We read in the book of Psalms 98, "With trumpets the sound of the shofar acclaims the sovereign Lord." Secondly, the shofar reminds us that we stand at Mount Sinai in order that we take upon ourselves what our ancestors took upon themselves when they said, "We will do and we will hear." Thirdly, Rosh Hashanah reminds us of the binding of Isaac, who offered himself to heaven and was replaced by the ram caught in the thorns in a thicket. Just as Abraham was ready to offer his only son's life for the sanctification of God's name, so too should we be ready at all times to offer our lives for the sanctification of God's name. From the very beginning, Abraham is a man of faith. The Lord is fully aware of the difficulty of what he asks of Abraham. He must leave everything. The faith of Abraham and Sarah reveals complete trust in God's plan. Their patience with which they waited out the promise led to their greatest joy. They brought forth their first and only son, Isaac. Later, despite their advanced age of Abraham and Sarah and Sarah's barrenness, Abraham puts faith in the Lord, confident that he will be the ancestor of countless descendants. God's covenant through Abraham was renewed with his son Isaac and with his grandson Jacob, or Israel, from whose 12 sons came forth the 12 tribes of the Jewish nation. And then there is the sacrifice of Abraham, his readiness to sacrifice the child of his dreams, of his promise. We read in Genesis chapter 22, "Take your son, your only son Isaac whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering." So Abraham rose early in the morning. The man who had without hesitation at the Lord's bidding set out from his homeland, now without question sets out to do this awful deed. He obeyed with a heavy heart, a heart pierced to the core by Isaac's unsuspecting question. "My father, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The story of the Akedah, which is the Aramaic word for binding, is really a shortened way of referring to the sacrifice of Isaac by his father Abraham, as portrayed in the book of Genesis chapter 22. It was written down centuries ago, but it existed in an oral form in Israelite tradition for many years. The point of the story is Abraham's unquestioning faith and God's acceptance of it as the occasion of his unconditional promise of future blessing to Abraham's descendants. Connected with this acceptance by God is the implication that human sacrifice is not wished by God nor necessary for showing Israel's generosity. The story is told to us in a few stark sentences. It provokes scandal for the modern mind. What sort of God is this who can command a father to kill his own son? What would a contemporary father do if he were to be called on to sacrifice his only son to God? He'd be thought mad if he had even considered it, and unfaithful to God as well. The precise meaning of this text is much discussed, but it is clear that it involves viewing Abraham as being tested, and as having passed the test and receiving from God the unconditional blessing of progeny. I'd like to consider 2 points of this Akedah story and show their relationship to Christianity, to Judaism, and to Islam. Our Christian lectionary, especially in the Catholic and mainline Protestant churches, is fascinated by how God's power endows the powerless in the Isaac stories. The Church Fathers turned the lack of character definition in the Isaac of the Hebrew Scriptures into an enduring pastoral model of complete obedience to the will of God. The story of the sacrifice of Isaac then becomes a prototype for the story of Jesus' passion. Jesus goes to the cross of Mount Golgotha as unquestionably as Isaac goes to the altar on Mount Moriah. The second point relates to Mount Moriah itself. Moriah, or Moriah in Hebrew, refers to the place of vision. Doubtless, the Israelites were drawn to the sacred high stone of Jerusalem because the Canaanites first worshipped on it. The link between the two peoples is dramatized in the Hebrew Scriptures by the wonderful story of Melchizedek, the legendary Canaanite priest, king of Jerusalem, who anticipated monotheism, the belief in one God. In the story, Melchizedek, standing on Jerusalem's sacred stone, consecrates an altar to El Elyon, the God Most High, whom the Israelites would name simply Elohim, Lord. Later, the patriarch Abraham, obedient to the Lord, binds his son Isaac for sacrifice on the sanctified rock now called Moriah. Eventually, Moriah becomes the foundation stone of Solomon's temple, built as the dwelling place of God. The precious rock becomes the bond between Judaism and her daughter faiths, Christianity and Islam. For it was on the Jewish temple that Jesus prophesied Jerusalem's destruction as the prelude to the arrival of God's kingdom. And 600 years after Jesus, with the Jewish temple in ruins, the Muslim conquerors of Palestine show their profound respect for the Abrahamic stone of sacrifice by building over it a magnificent octagonal shrine, naming it the Dome of the Rock. This stone on Mount Moriah is the source of Jerusalem's religious unity, and it's also the symbol of the world's faith. There's a famous medieval map that shows Jerusalem and Solomon's temple at the center of the world, the continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia fanning out from the center like gigantic petals. It's a vision of world redemption arising from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, whatever its problems, is still the root of redemption. The city continues to comfort believers and to stir their minds and hearts. The vision of the one God united Jerusalem's different peoples. What divides them is the daily, practical application of that vision. In a word, religion. The vision of God is given to human beings who speak different languages and see the world differently. Religion is born of these differences. 1,000 years after monotheism vanquished idolatrous polytheism, believers in the God of Israel quarreled in Jerusalem over who was the true messianic agent to the one God, and in that quarrel, Christianity was born. Later, the prophet Muhammad, rejected by both Jews and Christians, inspired an army of zealots who conquered Jerusalem. To show their pride in the triumph of Islam, they constructed the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, a shrine deliberately built higher than Constantine's Golgotha Basilica. The births of Christianity and Islam from Judaism were painful and bloody. How could we not expect that Jerusalem would become the battleground of three monotheistic faiths? If today we criticize the folly of religious conflict in the Holy City, should we not also lament the foolishness of God who chose a hilltop town as his earthly abode? For what pagan or Jew or Christian or Muslim would resist dominating God's dwelling place and thereby come into conflict with his brothers and sisters? There is no rock or inner sanctuary somewhere that contains God's essence. Our sacred city is neither Jerusalem nor Rome, despite the reverence we hold for these holy places. For us, the zone of the sacred is a living community of people united by faith in Jesus and the God of compassion he revealed to us. Both Judaism and Christianity teach that to destroy a single life is to destroy an entire world, and to sustain a single life is to sustain a whole world. Jews, Christians, and Muslims exist to reveal the holiness of God's name and God's sovereignty over all creation. In our world, filled with so many voices and things demanding first place, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam recognize God as sovereign over all creation. Together we yearn for the day when swords will be turned into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks, in Jerusalem, in the Holy Lands, and throughout the world. Rosh Hashanah is a wonderful opportunity for the celebration of life and a plea for its continuance. Mount Moriah and Mount Calvary are significant places of vision in the Bible. For on both mountains, we see a God who never abandons us in our deepest despair, terror, and death. God is with us through thick and thin, through day and night. Mount Moriah and Mount Calvary teach us that it's only when we are willing to let go of what we love most and cherish most in this life, to offer it back to God, the giver of all good gifts, that we can ever hope to receive it back in ways we never dreamed of or imagined. Only then can we ever experience resurrection and new life.